Denne uken Gene Sharp I Oslo for å promotere sin dokumentarfilm How to Start a Revolution. Filmen vises på Human Rights Human Wrong dokumentarfilmfestival tirsdag klokken 18 på Vika kino.
Nice to meet you.
Vi møtte Sharp på Rika Hotel søndag.
Nice to meet you, Mr. Gene Sharp. And I hope you have a pleasant time here in Norway.
Takk for det.
I understand you have previously worked here in Norway during the 50s and the 60s.
Yes.
We can start off, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Yes. I was brought to Norway from where I was a journalist in London, and Professor Arne Ness in philosophy invited me over for 2 one-month periods, and then arranged for me to come back full-time with Erik Grinde of the Institute for Samfunnsforskning. And I was here then for about two and a half years or more. And then I returned later after 4 years in Oxford. I was back at the University of Oslo in philosophy again for a bit over a year.
During that period you were working with Arne Ness?
I worked with Arne Ness somewhat, but I was mostly doing my own work, but he was very supportive of what I was doing.
Well, while you were in Norway, there was an incident with some teachers. Can you tell a little bit about
yes, my first month in Norway, I was given a place to live at the home of Marie and Herman Ruge, Marie Holmboe Ruge, and it was her father Håkon Holmboe and his wife Lotta that had been very important in the teachers' resistance back during the Quisling regime. So I did a major interview with Håkon Holmboe that was then published in a booklet at Peace News called Tyranny Could Not Quell Them. And I think that has been translated and published in New York some years ago.
Yeah. While you were here in Oslo and you did your work, it became some sort of a basis for your later work on where you're writing on the non-violent revolution.
That's correct. My big book is not From Dictatorship to Democracy. That's a small piece of what I've been doing. My big book was published back in 1973 called The Politics of Nonviolent Action. And it was a huge book in one volume of about 800 and 900 pages. There are 3 major parts of the work that began here at the Institute for Social Research. A list of specific methods, specific forms of action that could be used in protest and in resistance, which is much more than protest. I had a first list of, I think, 18 methods that had been actually used, and I might have had some examples published in maybe 12 pages stenciled. That became about 270 or 80 pages. In my big book, it was completed eventually when I was at Harvard. The second way Norway was, and that was really basic. That's what became the basis of what they now regard as famous list of 198 methods.
Yes.
I was also asked to give a lecture at the Institute for Samfunnsforskning on the dynamics. How does this work, if it does, in a conflict with an opponent that may be very brutal, very repressive? And that lecture then has developed and filled out as another major part of the Politics of Nonviolent Action. Became a volume of 350 or 70 pages there. And so a third way the work began here, which was very important. I was told accurately that I didn't know much about political power, and I believed him. So I arranged to go to Oxford and study political theory for 4 years, where I not only studied political theory, but also dictatorships and revolutions. And that theory of power analysis, however, became very fundamental in examining how nonviolent struggle really works, because all governments, including dictatorships, have weaknesses. They all have a need for certain sources of power. If you can identify what are those sources and know that they are all connected with obedience and cooperation of individuals and of institutions, then you can just, like you turn off water in the sink, it's too much water coming out, you don't try to push it up, you try to turn the switch to cut off the water. You can do that with sources of power of dictatorships also.
Do you feel like your work, since it's been like these days, it's been used in Egypt?
So I've been told.
Yeah, during the revolution there, and it's also in your newest film about you. You're a subject on the film called Gene Sharp: How to Start a Revolution.
Yeah, Roy Ayers' film.
Can you tell me a little bit about the film?
Well, you should speak to Rory about that. It does describe my work. It shows me walking on the streets of East Boston. It shows our office and how crowded it is, how messy my desk is with all kinds of papers. And he also, very importantly, shows places where we know, or pretty well know, that my work had had some influence, and with interviews of the people who participated in those cases.
But did you foresee it when you wrote it, back when you wrote your work, that these writings of you would make such an impact on people in the future?
Oh no, I couldn't imagine something like that. I always hoped that it would. We had a little clue once when I took one of that 18 or 12-page manuscripts on methods. I took it to a conference in Accra, Ghana one time, and the South African delegates and the delegates from another part of Africa all reported they had stayed up all night reading it. And that was a very simple list, and I thought, my goodness, there's really an interest, there's really a hunger. So I was always hoping it would be useful.
What are your main examples in how to overrun a dictatorship?
Well, you don't overrun it quite the way the word in English comes across very, like it's very simple. It's not simple. You could look at, as in the film, the Serbian Revolution against Milosevic's regime, which was very brutal and it killed a lot of people. In that regime, the group, youth group, Otpor Resistance, had two sources to my work. One was this essay, From Dictatorship to Democracy, which we at the Albert Einstein Institution office, we only had photocopies of an edition published in Bangkok, Thailand. And someone in California had got a copy of that, and he took it to Serbia and gave it to the organization Civic Initiatives. They got it translated and published in Serbian, so that was available. But probably more importantly was an Army colonel, a U.S. Army colonel, Robert Helvey, who had been a Vietnam War hero in Vietnam against the Vietnamese. But he at Harvard ran into me in a seminar I was giving. This is all in the film also. And he concluded this merited attention. And he gave it attention. And he had brought with him this 3 volumes of the politics of nonviolent action. And they gave it to them, and Sergei Popovich, the student leader of Otpor at the time, read it. He found this first chapter on sources, which had sources of power, that the sources of power always vary in how much they are available or how limited, that you could actually control whether those sources of power are available or not by adjusting the obedience and the cooperation and collaboration of institutions. And if you could turn them off, just like you turn off the spigot of water, it's not so easy, of course, then you should shrink those sources of power, you cut them off, and the regime is powerless, with no more sources of power. So that was very important.
Your work is clearly seen as a threat by a lot of the totalitarian leaders around the world. For instance, there is this Iranian propaganda video I saw, where you were in the same room with George Soros and some other guys, John McCain, and also Hugo Chavez has gone out and saying you're a CIA agent. How does this affect you?
Well, the CIA stuff is pure propaganda. It's never been true. I've never had any money from the CIA, and never would. They've done some bad things. I think they mean well, but they really don't know how to do things. So if that accusation I just brush off, to have the attention, however, of regimes that are not democratic, that really are quite repressive, which now includes the present Russian regime, which used my name also recently in attacking this kind of work. That's a bit of a compliment. If I make the dictators angry, I must be doing something right.
Exactly.
And I think it's their opinions that matter to me, but it's the people who learn from these writings if they can, because people have found this small essay from Dictatorship to Democracy greatly gives them a new insight. It gives them hope. We can change the situation, but to change the situation they have to learn, they have to do it right, because you can act and say you're inspired, and if you're inspired to do something foolish, you're not going to win. So you have to learn how to act, plan strategically, study hard before you ever begin to do anything, and then think heavily and plan, develop a strategy, and then start skillfully. Just a little bit of time. Don't think you're going to bring down the whole regime in 2 weeks. It's been there for decades, perhaps, or maybe lesser time, or maybe more. But like in the Second World War, the Allies did not win the defeat of the Nazi regime with one sweeping campaign. No. They started in various other places, including in North Africa, in Italy, and on down the line, and then you had the landing in Normandy. It took all those different campaigns, each of which was difficult to win. Similarly, in nonviolent struggle, you can't start up, say, you 1 or 2 or 3 methods in one place for 2 weeks, and the regime stays, and you think you've been defeated. That's nonsense. You haven't started. And you have to learn how to plan strategically and make motions carefully, and keep at it, and keep disciplined, keep the requirements. Do what the Egyptians and others do. Cast off fear, which Gandhi was always saying. I thought he was a bit naive, casting off fear in relation to all these terrible regimes. But that's what people have done. They've said, I'm not afraid anymore. And when Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister in India, who was a major leader of the national struggle in India, he said, our people, using these nonviolent means, have stood up, thrown their shoulders back, raised their heads high, and proud of themselves, and now they realize they can help control the situation. And everyone ever needs to do that.
You've been involved in this work for so many years now, and there's been a lot of changes in the world during your period.
Yeah.
Can you point on like one event or something that's I'm sorry, I'm gonna rephrase myself.
Go ahead.
Since you've been in a non-violent work for so many years, and there's been regimes coming and going. How do you view like today's situation with the Arabic Spring? Is it just a continuation of what's been going on before, or something new happening here?
Probably both. Obviously, technology has come into play, by which people can communicate very quickly with each other. You can get things on the web. Some of these essays from Dictatorship to Democracy, for example, can be downloaded from our Albert Einstein website. It's aeinstein.org. Not only in English, but in a great variety of translations. And people can learn from that. We also learn, but it's been romanticized a bit about technology. You assume that changes everything. We now name things after the technology tool, which is only much like a super telephone. And you don't name things after a telephone because the revolutionaries might have used it, or maybe wisely didn't. You can learn how to do that, but the opponents can also learn how to use it, and that's very important. And but the regimes, there are two things have happened. One is we have learned a lot about what nonviolent struggle is and how it operates. Much more information about its dynamics and capacity than Gandhi had, for example, in the 1920s or 30s. And that now it's widely available. Through research has been done, writings have been done, some are mine or some are by other people who deserve their credit. And that's important. But now it's been also, governments are paying attention, they don't like this. So they have people working on how to defeat this kind of struggle, and we should be aware of that. And one of the things they do to try to discredit this is to put their people agitating inside the resistance movements to stir up, to say we really got to use violence, and forgive them for sweet means, sweet reasons why you need to use violence. Or they actually get their agents in there pretending to be revolutionaries, pretending to be resistors, to actually do the violence themselves. That happened back in the 19th century. This is nothing new, but the danger is still there. And they even, I've heard they're even different, these governments are consulting with each other, you know. And notice in the United Nations problems about trying to do something about Syria, it's the Russians and the Chinese are objecting to doing anything about the bird slaughters in Syria. You know, these governments always like each other because they know they all stand or fall together in some ways. Because if the people in all these countries can learn how to wage this kind of struggle skillfully and competently, then the days of dictators may be gone in a few years.
You touched on my next question. I wanted to ask you about the situation in Syria, because just like last night, 2 nights ago, there was a couple of hundred massacred in homes.
Yeah, not to be surprised. There was many massacres there years before. You expect that. People think this is something you have to be shocked by and something new, and it is shocking and brutal with people. And then imagine trying to deal with resistance by shelling into the city as though it was a foreign country in the midst of a Second World War or something like that. But not only that, though, but some of the soldiers in the Syrian army have really done some thinking, and they don't want to do this anymore. So they've walked out. Now this presents, you know, the Chinese character, 2 characters you write, and if you can do it, I can. It's 2 symbols. One is danger, and one is opportunity. The danger is that those soldiers decide they must use their guns and turn them around and kill the soldiers they worked with last week. We know that is suicidal because of what happened in the Russian Revolution in 1905. That's what killed the revolution, when all the Tsar system was ready to collapse, and the army was ready to mutiny totally. And the Bolsheviks decided to get this general strike in Moscow turned over to a violent. The soldiers fought back, giving the Tsar his loyal soldiers for the first time in weeks, and the revolution was crushed within weeks. The same kind of thing could happen in Syria. It's not just about something several decades ago and therefore not relevant. It is very relevant, because if you're shooting at soldiers who have guns, you expect them to shoot back. It should not be something requiring new brilliance in super intelligence. But if they shoot back, they remain loyal soldiers of the regime. So the muting soldiers' best job is not to turn their guns around and kill off the previous friends, but to get the other soldiers who are still loyal to the regime, similarly to throw their guns away and join the revolution and paralyze the regime, because it no longer has an army to slaughter people. That is what's needed in Syria now.
What kind of when the revolution is on the way and the regime collapses, how do you manage to create a new society?
This is a very difficult moment and a very dangerous period. One of the final chapter or 2 from Dictatorship to Democracy points to that. I could also use some historical examples. But that's when the people who would like to be the new dictators want to take control, whether they're organized by the CIA or some foreign intelligence body, or whether in doctrinal Marxist-Leninists or some other version, some other group that believes in the necessity of violence and the necessity of dictatorships. Those people will try to engineer this thing. So you must prepare for this. I pointed to some of the ways to think about this, and particularly be aware of a coup d'etat by some group of the army or some political organization, perhaps with foreign intelligence advice or guidance, tries to do that. We have the only guidebook that I know of in English to try to block coup d'etat and how to defeat them. At about 60 or 70 pages. Also on our website, aeinstein.org, for download for free. We sell them too, and that is very important to have. So you got to, and then you have to construct the new institutions, new democratic procedures. You have to get all people of the intelligence agencies under the regime out of power, give them a pension, let them go somewhere and sit in the sun, but get them out of control of the police and the military. And then, and be fair, the whole society then should be prepared and trained in how to block a new coup d'etat, a new seizure of power by any would-be dictators.
So how do you see the situation in the Arabic countries right now? Because there is so many revolutions at the same time. How is that the way to go, or should we concentrate on one at a time?
Well, we don't and shouldn't have a choice. It's not up for us to decide. We can offer our opinions, but I don't do that much. It's up for the people of those societies. But the countries and the situations are also very dissimilar, not the same at all. So I think it's natural this could have happened. People become inspired, but think they can know how to do it, and maybe they do, and maybe they don't. Maybe they're not ready yet, because you have to. If you had an oppressive system, it's not just that the government is strong; it's that the people are weak, and the people have to learn how to not be weak, how to regain their power. I call it popular empowerment, empowerment of the masses of the people to really take control of their society again, but maybe they haven't had it for decades, or in some places never forever before. But they must learn how to do that, and how to structure new institutions. What is the role of elections? How do you arrange various political parties? How do you ensure that it really maintains the development of democratic structures and popular control, or how bureaucracies take over? That's a very difficult period. So what happened in Egypt was only part one. Now, the struggles there are going on, and they're trying to do part two, maybe because they made a big mistake in negotiating with Mubarak about his condition. I will resign, but you have to give the army the control I used to have, because they're the ones who supported me. And so you give the army that supported Mubarak for decades the authority to be in the new government. They say temporarily. The people who are given that authority don't like to go away quickly. So you have to plan how you're going to get them out, whether what they're doing in Egypt, in the various demonstrations in various parts of the country now. It's certainly important. Those are all the wisest actions. I don't know. I can't advise that. It's people with those countries that figure it out. But they've got to figure it out. Otherwise, it can be taken, the victory can be stolen.
But do you think we can see a clear change within a few years, or was this?
I don't know. I'm not a fortune teller, and I don't create political fiction. You know, it depends on what people do, and that I have no influence over. But the people of that country have to be very careful.
How do you rank an ideal society?
Oh, I don't even talk about ideal societies.
Do you think it exists?
No.
Do you think it has the chance, the world have a chance to have an ideal society in the future?
Not in the way people usually use the term ideal society. I think we'll always have problems. We'll always have conflicts. And we should. Because things can go so badly, so easily, you know. So I don't talk about utopias. Thomas More wrote Utopia, you know, an ideal imaginary society. I don't pay much attention to that.
Okay. A couple more questions. Some say that you are a man that has changed the world. How do you comment on such a statement?
I don't agree with that. The world is far beyond my control, and if it were under my control, I would, if I were keeping my head correct, I would abdicate and let the people take charge themselves.
But do you think there is a situation where non-violence don't manage to meet like the violence from regimes?
Yes, if the people are weak, if they don't know what the hell they're doing, if they make major mistakes, if they're intimidated by the first threat or use of violence, they're going to fail. But it's not all under the control of the dictatorial regime. That's heavily under the control of the population and the people of that country. So, but you have to do it competently. If you have no strategy, if you have masses of people like Tiananmen Square and the 350 other Chinese cities that had demonstrations at that time, and you did not have a plan, you did not know how you really bring down the regime, and you didn't do it competently, although you were brave, you like to fail. So prepare, think, study, plan, and be very careful what you do. And don't start out trying to bring down everything quickly. Start off with small goals and objectives. Defeat the regime in small case after small case. Get the record settled that you are becoming competent to make things changing, and get more participation and courage from the masses of people. And then sometimes you get the big prize.